Union Chain Bridge Project, Archaeology Volunteering Feedback, by Ben Saunders from Wessex Archaeology and featuring Dave Went from Historic England. 1st of February 2023. In 2021 and 2022, volunteers on the Union Chain Bridge Project worked with experts from Wessex Archaeology and Historic England to investigate 2 hitherto unexplored historic sites near the bridge. Using a variety of different techniques, they were trained to survey 2 sites, Chester Crane Camp and Horncliffe. The results were so interesting that the project team was keen to dig to find out more. In 2022, Historic England used the results from Chester Crane to inform their soon-to-be-published research. In September 2022, volunteers from the local community, led by Wessex Archaeology, conducted an excavation at Horncliffe. This talk sums up what was, and wasn't, found in that dig. The meeting attendees include some of the volunteers who did the work at the sites, other people from the community interested in local heritage, and the project team. Okie dokie, so I'm going to hand over to Ben.
Evening, everyone. I hope you're all well. And thank you very much, Carol, for that quick introduction. Thank you all for coming to this quick sort of summing up of the recent work at Horncliffe, which was completed by volunteers through the Union Chain Bridge Crossing Borders Inspiring Communities project run by Museums Northumberland. Just quickly going to run through the funders of the project. So the funding for the project has come from Heritage Lottery Fund and Scottish Borders Council and Northumberland County Council as well. Technical archaeological support for the project has been provided by Wessex Archaeology, who I work for. The project has been somewhat interrupted by COVID, but despite delays, we've completed a series of surveys on archaeological sites around the Union Chain Bridge itself, as well as then completing a small test excavation on one of those sites that was surveyed. I'd like to say a massive thank you to all of the volunteers and participants who got involved in both the survey days and the excavation week, braving the Northumberland weather in both November in 2021 and then September in 2022. I'm sure you're all aware, it doesn't really matter what time of year it is, you get a chance to experience large volumes of weather regardless when you're outdoors in Northumberland, and these projects were no different to that. The work we've done has also been enormously supported by Historic England and the team within the North East offices and Yorkshire offices, and we're very grateful to everyone at HE for that work. So thanks very much to all. Can I persuade this to do another slide? Yes, happy days. So the initial surveys back in November 2021 were done on 2 sites within the area surrounding Union Chain Bridge. First of all, a group of hardy volunteers spent 2 days surveying Chester Crane Camp to within either an inch or a millimetre of its life, depending on what equipment we were using. HE's surveying team with Dave Went taught people sort of slightly older technique of plane table recording and triangulation, while our geomatics team cheated quite a lot by bringing a LiDAR drone to do a highly detailed topographic model of the monument, which is what you can see in the top right corner. Volunteers also had a chance to undertake a geophysical survey of the camp using a push cart with magnetometers attached to it, which, considering how you can see the topography of Chester Crane there, it's not an easy job to push the cart across all the humps and bumps there. But we got some lovely results there in the centre there, showing the 2 large ditches and then possibly some internal features within the enclosed space. We also had the opportunity to complete a geophysical survey over Horncliffe Fort, which is just outside the village of Horncliffe. This was a particularly interesting opportunity because the monument itself has received almost no study since it was scheduled, and so there's no information about the layout and extent or internal or external features of the fort. All the information for it came from the old county numbers system, which is mostly related to antiquarian antiquarian investigations. So we really had a unique chance to, well, not unique, but a rare chance to study something that hasn't been looked at before in great detail. As you can see from the grayscale image there, you've got a series of strong dipolar anomalies have been identified. Basically, dipolar is one polar is the black, one polar is the white, which serve to sort of segregate the northeastern portion of the site. These are indicative of ditches and possibly banks as well. So the magnetometer survey looks at variations in the magnetic field of the Earth, tiny variations in that magnetic field caused by different soil patterns, different soil makeups, which could be a ditch with a higher moisture content, it could be a pit, it could be a burnt feature which has a higher magnetic signal than the surrounding area. In this case, what you've got is these twin lines coming round and across here and here, which suggests a sort of an angular, rectangular, oblong camp of some kind, two ditches coming through there. They have got a possible break here along the southern side, which could be an entranceway into the structure, and it corresponds very nicely to the area of the scheduled area of Horncliffe Fort. There's also these sort of bandings coming down through here. They were put down as potential archaeology. There's also the possibility of it being geology, geological variations within the subsoil in the area. But they do have some nice linear features in it, including this possible square feature here. They're outside the fortlet itself, outside the scheduled area as well. And it's in a sort of unusual situation to see possible features outside a fortlet as one of these small forts. But we didn't know what they were. That's the problem with geophysics. You can see what's under the ground, but you don't necessarily understand what that is. So what we also were able to do, this is the interpretation of the geophysical survey by my colleagues in our Sheffield office, who are specialists in this. And you can see they're fairly confident with the blue, where you've got banks and ditches coming through here. And that was a fairly definite or probable result. The green shows possible archaeology, where we're less sure. It could be geological, it could be archaeological, it could be a product of later agricultural activity. There's also some potential features within the fort, some internal features, possible pit and other cut features within there. The problem with geophysics, again, is you're seeing all of the variation across the site. You can't tell necessarily whether that's all from the same phase of occupation, whether it is all actually human man-made or due to human activity. So that could be from a later or earlier occupation of the site, or it could just be geological variation. We've also got some evidence of past agricultural activity. These are potentially bits of ridge and furrow, or rig and furrow if you're north of the Tweed. That's potentially quite straight, it's quite close together, which is a sort of a demonstration of post-medieval, later medieval ridge and furrow. And you can also see the strong dipolar, this sort of superficial geology coming through here. The 6-inch OS map from between 1888 and 1913 shows a contour line within that sort of area, but the field itself is now quite flat. That discrepancy suggests that there's been landscaping to try and improve the field for agriculture at some point in the last 120 years or so. So again, that can impact on both the potential for archaeology there and how much archaeology might survive beneath the plough soil. If we look at the location of the fort itself, this is some of the 1 meter resolution LiDAR from the Environment Agency online viewer. And it really demonstrates the fort's position within the landscape. This is the Tweed up here, and then the wide, flat Tweed floodplain. And the fort sits quite nicely on this, in this little corner here, up on the top of this escarpment, above the floodplain. It's used, its northern edge, its northern defensive edge and its eastern defensive edge are part of the defiles going into this Burn Valley and into the Tweed floodplain. And it's quite a common thing for Roman military features to use these elements of the landscape. They're not necessarily going for the highest point within the field, which is actually over here, but they are utilizing the landscape features that they can find. Potentially, they're using this. But you could ask, why haven't they built a fort over here? It may well be that they need to keep some sort of intervisibility with another site nearby for signaling or for communication aspects, which means they've chosen that corner. But we'll go into that sort of aspect in more detail in a wee bit. So this fort, this area is at 32 meters above sea level, and the floodplain below is at about 8 meters. So it's quite a substantial change in topography there. There is some potential. This LiDAR is only 1 meter resolution, so you can see a nice bits of agricultural ploughing and stuff over there, but you wouldn't necessarily catch the whole ditch. And you've also got some interference from the trees within this area, within this bit of LiDAR. There is some potential for the northern and eastern ditches of the fortlet to be extant underneath that woodland, but obviously they've also undergone infilling and transforms over the last 2,000 years, which means they might not be as obvious to the eye. If you look with the eye of faith, you can sort of see two ditches there, but you have to really look for it and have to really believe. So leave that for now. So the excavation itself, we went back over the course in September, from I think it was Wednesday to Sunday, and included an open day on the Saturday for the local community and for young archaeologist clubs around the border area. On site, the team excavated initially 4 2x2 meter test pits and one 1x4 meter test pits. So you've got 2x2 here, here, and here. We extended this one up at test pit 1 to be a 3x2 because we found some interesting stuff in it. And then this was initially a 4x1 meter, and I think we added an extra 3 meters because we were struggling to actually work out what was going on in it. So test pit 1 and test pit 2 were targeting the internal features within the fortlet itself. Test pit 3 and test pit 4, whoops, hello, giving away what we found. Test pit 3 and test pit 4 were testing these exterior features from outside the fort to see if they were real. And then test pit 5 was looking at the ditches themselves to try and target them and see if we could make sure they are there and also try and reach the bottom of them. Unfortunately, so due to the poor weather on the Friday, I think we lost 1 day of sight to torrential rain, which also meant that most of Saturday morning was bailing out the trenches themselves and cleaning them up again. But despite that, we did still get some good results during the week, and we'll just quickly run through those now. This is test pit 1, the 2x3. So that looks pretty good for a rough cobbled surface within the fortlet, which would make sense. That's where you want to cobble if you're going to cobble anywhere. So after quite a hefty amount of shoveling and pickaxing, the plough soil was quite a lot tougher than I think we were all expecting, to be honest. But we did get down to this cobbled surface area, and it's got these two very possible areas of larger flattened stones, which could be post pads for upright timbers, which are known from these sort of small Roman sites for structures within the fortlets themselves. And if you, again, with the eye of faith, this side looks a little bit less cobbled than this side. So potentially you've got either the interior of a building or you've got an internally cobbled building within here, if you want to really believe things. But we have, as I can say, there are other examples of this sort of structure within fortlets around the border region, and between the Hadrian's Wall, the Antonine Wall, and then up into Fife and Perth and Kinross and that sort of area, where you get more of these fortlets. You do see these sort of structures coming through. Negative results are still results. So we had 2 test pits that didn't contain what we would necessarily think of as archaeology. Test pit 2, which was inside the fortlet, demonstrated that there were areas where the base geology, the solid bedrock geology, was relatively close to the surface, but we didn't see the possible cobbled surface in here, or any other features either. And then test pit 3 outside the fortlet demonstrated that went straight down to through the subsoil, plough soil here, about 30 centimeters, and then another 10, 15 centimeters of subsoil onto a fairly convincing natural substrate below there. Just to make sure, we did ask someone who didn't move fast enough to say no, to hit a little corner out of it to make sure that it was natural. And thank you very much to whoever did that. It was natural. I can confirm. It's possible that this stone here might have been what was causing one of the anomalies within the geophysics. It's quite a big lump, and it would obviously have a different magnetic signal to the area around it. So that's potentially one we saw there. Test pit 4, on the other hand, just nearby, had these 2 quite odd linear features coming through it. They're running roughly north-south. They were cut into the natural substrate there. Relatively certain we got to the bottom of them within here. Very close together, U-shaped profile, no obvious features or finds from within them. And this is sort of one of the limitations of these very small test pits. You can get an idea that there is something there that somewhat confirms your geophysical survey if you have one beforehand, but you don't really understand necessarily what that is. Particularly not within a 2 by 2 meter. But what is good is it has confirmed there is something there. What it is, we don't know. Like I said, no finds from within them, and no. We did take an environmental sample from each of them to see if we can return any material from it. The study of the results of these didn't actually return any information other than that the deposits were quite heavily mixed, and it may well be that these are the result of that landscaping within the post-medieval period, or within the late 19th century, early 20th. But again, there's features there, and future study may well be able to find out what they are. We also then at test pit 5, initially the edge of the test pit was pretty much there, and we dug down and didn't really see any difference across the base of the trench. What you're looking for in archaeology is to try and see differences in soil which suggest you've got a cut or a fill, or a different process has happened to different parts of soil that you can look at. But in this trench, we dug down, and we could tell it wasn't natural, like the untouched substrate, because it was too jumbly, to use a technical phrase. But it wasn't making sense. So we extended it by 3 meters, coming into the fort, and essentially pretty much bang on where our edge of trench had been was the edge of the ditch. And again, due to losing a chunk of time, due to weather, we weren't able to dig down and get the full cross section of this ditch. Examples elsewhere, particularly of this, you can see how wide it is. It's at least 4 meters wide. Potentially has its other side somewhere over here. Examples of these from other fortlets are between 1.5 and 2 meters deep. So in some ways, we lucked out by being able to blame the weather and not have to try and dig down that far. We would have had to stop at 1.2 meters anyway. So it's just for safety reasons. But again, demonstrating that there is definitely something there. It's on the right alignment for the ditches that are shown in the geophysics, and it is this very steep-sided sort of V shape. You can see this V shape, possible V shape edging coming in through here, which would be typical of a Roman defensive ditch. I mean, there's only so many ways you can dig a ditch, but that is a fairly obvious one. Whoops. In terms of, we took some environmental samples from the fill, which demonstrated that fill was probably medieval in date, which again is not a problem. If you've got a landscape feature like a fortlet, it's going to fill up gradually over time, and the upper layers are going to be potentially considerably later than the period of that ditch is actually from. And we know, well, we are fairly confident there was some extensive landscaping within the area during the post-medieval and medieval period and modern period. So it's not a massive problem. If we managed to get to the base of it, sampled a really nice waterlogged layer from down there with lots of nice preserved environmental material, and that had been post-medieval, then that would be more problematic, and well, for the listing certainly, and for the scheduling. But we haven't. That is still a potential for future work, and it should definitely be. If there is going to be future work in the area, it would be an important target to go for. And this project has been able to demonstrate that we now know where that feature is and roughly how wide it is and roughly how deep it is. So it's got we've progressed knowledge, which is always what we're going for. So in terms of finds, again, I don't know whether I'm cursed. I might be cursed, but we always go to projects and just go and think, fantastic. We have got a Roman site. There's going to be lots of finds there. The Romans have lots of stuff. That'll be great. And we found no Roman stuff whatsoever, which was quite upsetting. But we did get a small amount of post-medieval finds and undated, but likely to be medieval to modern finds within the topsoil. You get this very nice little lead spindle well, which is probably medieval. It's not particularly chronologically distinctive. Heavier spindle wells, including those made of lead, appear to be introduced to England and the UK in general within the sort of later 14th century onwards or so. And it comes in through new technologies brought in from the continent in terms of spinning and in terms of other aspects of cloth manufacture. Prior to that, they're usually using lighter materials for that sort of thing. And we also had some ceramic building material, just sort of, which is usual within farm fields close to villages. It's quite a good way of breaking up harder, heavier clays and allowing better drainage. So you do tend to find bits of tile and bits of pottery just as a general sort of manuring of the fields to try and break up the soil and make them more viable for agriculture. Next slide. There we go. So just quick, we confirmed that there was something there, which is nice. We identified a possible internal features within the fortlet, a cobbled surface, and the potential for timber structures. We did find one of the ditches that surrounds the fortlet. There is activity going on in the southwest, outside the fortlet. The Museum of Northumberland guys and a couple of colleagues from University of Dundee did a very, very successful open day, popular across the yak clubs within the Borders region and within the local community, and we have improved the understanding of the scheduled monument overall. So as far as our aims for the project went, that was all a big tick, and that's gone well. Just quickly going to try and contextualize why that's important, and also then contextualize the overall excavation within sort of the wider history of an archaeology of Roman borders. So the excavations do offer information about the makeup of the fortlet and associated fortlet features, particularly when you bring in the geophysics results. And this sort of shows the layered nature of archaeological investigation. You don't just go and hit a hole in a field for no reason at all. It's you're thinking about it. You're developing these sort of approaches and research questions that come through it. The results from test pit 5 do demonstrate that the inner ditch identified on the geophysics was there and was at least 5 meters wide, which gives some confidence for there to be a second outer ditch, as was demonstrated on the geophysics. The LiDAR imagery does suggest potentially that those northern and eastern sides were may have had some sort of feature within that area, although obviously they're mostly using the topography as the defensive aspect there. And they've also, the whole project has provided information to Historic England about the current preservation of the fortlet, and enabled them to be able to manage the site as and to help to preserve what's there more effectively. On a sort of wider scale, very few fortlets have been investigated in recent years. The majority of the excavations are initially conducted around the turn of the 19th, 20th century. And as such, they tend to have a lot of very nice line drawings, but not necessarily a lot of scientific analysis or assessment of what's going on. It's less true of the forts and fortlets on the Antonine Wall in southern Scotland, which were more heavily investigated during the 70s and 80s because of development, because of the requirements for more thought there. But despite that, the antiquity of the literature around fortlets, we can sort of bring the results from Horncliffe to a wider area. So there are parallels in terms of landscape position. It has parallels for fortlets on Hadrian's Wall, for instance, the one at Haltwhistle, and ones further north in Perth and Kinross, with at least one side of the fort being placed directly on the upper edge of a bit of higher ground above a river floodplain, and then another side, in this case the east at Horncliffe, being up against the top of a burn valley, so that two of the sides of the fortlet have natural defences holding them in place. It is interesting that the positioning of the fortlet using those landscape features took precedent over locating the fortlet on the highest ground within the immediate area, and therefore there are more complicated discussions of locating these defensive features than just going for the highest bit so you can see around you. The position on the fortlet above the Tweed is also, the location is potentially due to being roughly halfway between known Roman occupation at Tweedmouth to the east, which the Devil's Causeway Roman road is likely to run to from Lowick, and the temporary campsite at Groat Hall to the west. The presence of a small fortlet at this point in the Tweed also allows for control of this section of the river, and it's situated above a small ford situated a small force close to the fords further up the Tweed around Ladykirk, which would have been usable during the Roman period. And the Tweed is also navigable at this point as well, so you can get ships to it fairly happily. Certainly in the Roman period anyway. In terms of parallels in form and size and shape, it's roughly 100 meters by 100 meters, inclusive of the two defensive ditches, with an enclosed area of 60 by 60 meters. The stratigraphic evidence suggests that the internal areas of the fortlet were cobbled, which has parallels within the excavated fortlet at Kames Castle in Perth and Kinross, and that fortlet also had evidence for timber structures within it. Along the larger ditches also have parallels at Kames Castle, which had more extensive defensive ditches alongside the two, because it didn't have natural advantages within the topography. There's also probably the closest excavated example, not in terms of location, but in terms of sort of parallels, is the fort at Cappock near Roxburgh in the Scottish borders. That was also similarly constructed between the area between the Antonine Wall and Hadrian's Wall, this sort of inter-wall area. So of a similar size, and excavations show it had internal post-built structures as well as several defensive ditches. There was at least 4 phases of use at Cappock. Initial Agricolan period fort through to a later Flavian revival, and then 2 phases of Antonine and Antonian occupation and reworking. That phasing matches the much bigger fort nearby them at Newstead, further up the Tweed. The internal buildings at Kapuk were post-built on rammed clay floors, so they didn't really have evidence for trench foundations or for post holes. So this is a timber building being built up rather than being pushed into the ground and then built, which would again have parallels with what we found at Horncliffe. Steep-sided defensive ditch measured at least 5 meters in width. Again, has parallels with the later Flavian ditch at Kapuk, which was also a V-shaped profile ditch up to 2 meters deep, and then had a later recut within that. Ditches on the fortlets around the Antonine Wall are generally smaller, 2.5 meters wide and about 1.2 meters deep. So essentially the forts on the wall have smaller, less deep ditches because they have more defensive stuff around them, whereas these small, more independent fortlets might have larger, deeper ditches to keep everyone out or to keep things in. There are similar external features found at Oxon in the Scottish borders as well. There's 2 small ditched annex features to that, and then there's a much larger one to the southeast of that feature as well. They have suggested that the larger one to the southeast is possibly for a paddock for the horses for the detachment who are based there, whereas the other ones are possibly more for agricultural use or for feeding the soldiers who are there. It's not really clear on that, but what is clear is even when you're doing such small excavations into such a much larger area, you do tend to find fewer artifacts than if you were doing a much bigger area, obviously, but also it's down to luck. At Watling Lodge in Falkirk, one pit contained 95% of the artifacts found on that site, and that was actually just 1 or 2 pottery vessels that had been broken into and into that pit. So again, it does tend to come down to luck. We may have just been unlucky. We didn't find any pits. Pits tend to be where you get artifacts. We didn't get to the bottom of the ditch. That's again where you tend to find artifacts. So there may well be other things still hiding out there and waiting for someone to find them all. But yeah, I think that pretty much rounds up. I'd like to say a massive thank you to everybody who's been involved in the project. I had a great time with it. And I know my colleagues who were on site for the week really enjoyed themselves as well and had a lovely time. Thank you to everyone. Yeah, the volunteers involved, the Museum of Northumberland team, HE, and the landowners and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. That's really interesting and putting a lot of it in context. And I think you possibly undersold a little bit about what we learned, because I know certainly I learned a vast amount from all this activity, and I spent a lot of the time that week washing up, and I still managed to learn a lot from you all. And I would echo the thanks to everybody who's involved. I have had a couple of questions, and before anyone thinks I'm bullying this chap, he has confirmed that he's happy to ask these questions and to make these points himself. So we have Malcolm, who came on the dig. Who didn't come on the dig but did some of the surveying, at the other site, and he, I think, has quite a bit of knowledge about other stuff, and he's sort of mentioned something about the Devil's Causeway, which you mentioned, Ben. So Malcolm, do you want to unmute yourself and sort of tell us what you wanted to say?
Thanks, Carol. If someone, whoever's got the screen, could click on that link that I sent is to a survey report of a fortlet, or a structure that's been indicated as a fortlet near where I live. I live in Morpeth, and it's about 6 miles up the river, and it's just very strikingly similar. Yeah, so if you scroll down, there's about page 2 or 3. There's exactly what Ben was saying. There's the earthwork survey. There you go. And so basically, it's almost identical in size, and it sits on a bluff over the River Wansbeck, and it's never been excavated. It's under a forest at the moment. There's a commercial fir plantation, so I'd love someone to come and lead it. Well, anyway, I'd love to get my hands on it. So just sharing that. That was quite a recent survey, but but anyway, it's never been excavated. It's interpreted as a fortlet with another structure next to it, and it struck me as very similar,
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's fantastic. I'm a little bit ashamed I haven't. I'll try and add that into my reference for this report. Actually, that's really useful. Thank you.
No worries, Ben. Yeah. Well, I did one other question. I mean, I think you've sort of implicitly answered it, but I wonder if you could just be you're clearly interpreting this as a fortlet and not a marching camp.
Yeah.
Could you just, sort of give us 2 or 3 bullet points as to, what the key evidence for that, that one thing, not the other is, please?
Yeah,
absolutely. All right?
Yeah, no, we did have discussed it a little bit in the report. So the scheduling for the area calls it Horncliffe Fort.
Yeah.
And there were 3. If you're going to put things into categories, there are 3 sort of main categories for these Roman military sort of things.
Yeah.
You have forts, fortlets, and marching camps.
Yeah.
So the forts are your housesteads, your vinderlanders, the big, fairly permanent, large garrisons, measuring sort of, I think housesteads is about 300 meters by 200 meters or so, and that's that sort of classic playing card shape. You've got barrack blocks, you've got gates, that sort of stuff, and they're quite a statement. They're fairly permanent structures. They're occupied for 2, 3, 4, 500, 400 years or so, depending on where they are, and they would have a permanent garrison. And they often gain the sort of civilian settlement outside them, the vicus sort of aspects to them. Fortlets themselves are, I suppose you've also got mile castles on the walls as well within that. Fortlets are much smaller, so they are these sort of 60 by 60 square-ish things. They would have had a detachment of soldiery within them of about, I think it's between 10 and 12, and then a decurion, or maybe possibly a few more. I'd have to check. But it's a much smaller detachment. That detachment would have been in the fortlet for a number of months, maybe 6 months to a year, and then they would have moved and been replaced with another detachment. And so they're much more about. They're less about. It's more of a symbol of control. Other than actual control of the area. And much more sort of like small forward operating bases, if you in modern sort of military parlance. And then marching camps themselves, they tend to be the sort of thing that are put up, or if you want to, the old idea was that a legion marching would dig their marching camp each night and move on. I mean, obviously they are reused because they tend to be within a stage along a march, but then they are much more temporary structures where you essentially have one small ditch and bank going around a much larger area which a legion can camp in. So I think it's due to the size, shape, and layout of the forts of the fortlet itself. That's why we've called it a fortlet within this, rather than a marching camp and rather than a fort itself.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. That was a superb answer. That's very clear in my mind, Ben. Thank you.
It's really that one at Longshore is fantastic, and it's really interesting to see the structure outside it as well.
I know, yeah. There's an interest because George Joby did a very brief mention of it, and he interpreted that structure as a what do you call it? Auxiliary. The auxiliary areas outside camps. They've got a name, but the author of this was a bit less sure about it all, really. Anyway, so that was done quite, it's only about 15 years old, that report. So it's the discussion's quite well referenced and up to date. Yeah,
it's interesting. And these fort again, it's another inter-wall fort between Hadrian's Wall and yeah, that's really cool.
Sort of about halfway between Corbridge and Learchild, along the Devil's Causeway.
Yeah.
Mark's made a very good point about the paucity of finds that you mentioned, Ben. He said that if the fortlet was abandoned in an orderly manner, then all the valuable goods would have been cleared, so there wouldn't be very much left for us to find anyway, which I think is a really good point. Thank you, Mark, for that point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. That's exactly it. Unlike the forts, which are permanently occupied with large numbers of people involved, these are much smaller detachments. They tend to have they want to, if they're throwing anything away, it's because it's broken. And that's why it would be in the bottom of ditches and bottom of pits. And again, particularly with a lot of their kits, it's if it's not pottery, they want to be able to reuse it. You know, it's all got value. It's all got it can all be recycled, melted down, and started again. So we do tend to museum, we'd be dealing with lost items rather than discarded items, unless it's pottery, and then it tends to be put into waste pits and middens. And if you don't hit them, then as you say, you're not going to find it.
Exactly. We've got an absolute classic case of that in Berwick at the moment, with just outside my back garden. Actually, they're digging up the site for the new hospital, and they've found very interesting things, like a barrel latrine, which is exactly what you can imagine. People have used it as a loo and then put the lid on and buried it, but also thrown away things down a pit. We've got some pony skeletons down a pit. So
Wow.
Different attitude towards animals and care, I think, in those days, but from the Middle Ages. But there we go. Now, we have actually also been joined by Dave Went from Historic England, but I know he's probably just done a marathon journey back from almost the opposite side of the country, so I don't want to impose on him if he's not happy to speak to us about the Historic England's aspect of the project. If you're tired, that's fine.
Well, I've just come back from the toe of Cornwall by car, carrying a load of equipment, and my head's full of the Neolithic around St Austell. So I wasn't prepared to give a talk tonight. I was really turned up to hear Ben talk because I was interested to see what they found, and it's all very fascinating. And just to say hello to various people who might remember me from the first round of this. And also to give a bit of a teaser, because much delayed, very much apologies for that. We're on the cusp of putting out the research report on the Chester Crane camp, which, if I can share a screen, I'll just show you a teaser screen.
Should be able to.
Try that one. See if that works. You seeing anything that looks like a report cover? And I think this is also a response to Ben. I've just been referred to as old school, which I quite like, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, we did use some of the Whizzy kit, and we very much appreciated the LiDAR drone that Wessex brought up, and we used our own for doing structural motion. But the old school part about it isn't about the measurement, it's about the understanding. I think the people who came out with us went through that process of reading the landscape. And so the image they're seeing there is one image of several in the report that's coming out shortly, and it really just strips it back to the archaeology. So you're going through the LiDAR, through the SFM, to saying what matters. The other teaser is, of course, we've actually called it a promontory fort in the name of the report. We're very convinced that it's a late prehistoric promontory fort and nothing else, nothing medieval, nothing to do with border wars in the 17th century or whatever. We've also tied it in to a pattern of forts that extends up the Tweed, and when you start looking at that in context with other ones, Grote for one, but also the one that wraps around the English side of the abutment of the Union Chain Bridge, you're starting to see very much a consistent pattern of fortifications sharing this sort of use of the topography, cutting off little peninsulas, enclosing bits of the cliff, much as the Romans are doing with Ben's site at Horncliffe, where they're taking advantage of the topography to save themselves a job to a degree, to give them access down to the river, and to command something that's particular to that place, whether it's a view, whether it's a crossing point on the river or whatever. So it's all coming up. It's just stuck in a queue of things that need to be quality assured by somebody at the moment, but it should be out within a fortnight. It'll be available digitally, and we'll send around the link. I'll also very happily provide paper copies to anybody who was deeply engaged and prefer to have a shelf filler. So let Carol know, and Carol will let me know, and I'll run the numbers on that. But that's where we are with that. And it's apologies, really, because we're a very small team, and we've been rushed off our feet since we were released into the wild again after COVID, catching up on all sorts of things. So this report is disastrously late, but better late than never, I hope.
I think, again, you do yourself down there. We've all learnt so much from working with your team and with the Wessex team. It's just been absolutely eye-opener for me. I think I've said to you before, you know, the way Neil and I walk around, and we used to look at the world in terms of geology because we're interested in geology, but you've taught us so much to look at other things now. It's been an absolute game changer. And again, I will say I'm very grateful to both teams from Historic England and from Wessex, but also to our wonderful team of volunteers. But our volunteering aspect is not finished. There's still lots to do on our project. So we will stay in touch and we'll still find some more things out, I'm sure. So anybody got any further
I'm trying to stop sharing and I can't figure out how to do it. This is my old school business coming into play again.
I can do it for you. Do you want me to be bossy?
Yeah, please.
Okay. That should hopefully have, oh no, it hasn't actually. Yes, it has.
Okay.
So are there any other questions that people have? If you're not feeling confident to say them out loud, you can type them in the chat. Some people looking very thoughtful but shaking their heads. Well, it's perhaps not seen as a bit old-fashioned. Oh, has a hand.
Just one question. Are you going to go back to Horncliffe and dig a deeper hole at some point?
Are you going to find us some money to do it with?
Oh. Touche.
Sorry, you set that line up for me. I'm sorry. So if anyone knows any local millionaires who are really interested in history, put them in touch with us, please. But we would love to do some more. But we'll see what happens. Malcolm.
Well, same question to Dave. What about going back to Chester Crane and trying to target some, something in the middle, or somewhere that you would recommend?
Yeah, we've done all the steps that you'd normally do in preparation for digging a hole. We've refined the research questions. Ben's team did wonderful things with geophysics with volunteers. We've got some tantalizing suggestions of round houses somewhere towards the nose of the promontory.
Yeah. But
the reason for Horncliffe is Horncliffe, you could really answer a research question that couldn't be answered any other way. Whereas at Chester Crane, the analytical approach we took pretty much narrowed down what it is, and we can answer a lot of the questions from non-invasive survey. Whereas in Horncliffe, it really got to the point where, it kind of looks like a fortlet, but it still could be something else.
Yeah.
It needed that intrusive approach to get to something quite empirical to say what it is, and I think Ben's got that. It would have been lovely to have a Roman helmet or a Samian dish come up, but you can't get a coconut every time, and it's the weight of evidence is certainly there. I was really impressed by that.
Okay.
But I still think you could dig a deeper hole and have another look. There's got to be a bottom to that ditch somewhere.
Yeah, to get a proper date.
We'll certainly be looking for. Well, now we have that sort of tantalizing aspect. We will certainly be looking to try and get more funding to go back or do something, because I think there's still potential to get information out that we haven't got as yet. That's probably going to involve using some sort of machinery to take off the plough soil on a slightly larger area, but again, still doing the same sort of keyhole archaeology surgery that we were doing in this time, but this time targeting that ditch and really trying to get to the base of it.
Like I said, if anyone knows any benevolent millionaires, send them our way, please do. There's lots of things we'd still like to learn and like to find out. But it feels like our volunteers on our project, with your help, Wessex and Historic England, with your help, we've managed to actually not just train some people to do something, but we've actually managed to contribute to some real developments in knowledge. And I think that's, speaking personally, I hope I speak for the other volunteers, that's very satisfying, not just to learn, but to think that you've done something useful and that's contributing to knowledge generally. So, Mark.
No, it's just say a big thank you to Wessex and Dave and the HE team for your forbearance of people who don't know very much, like me, as it were. Learned a great deal, and it was a lovely approach at Chester Crane of making us look at things in a different way. And certainly going on from that, I've been volunteering at some other archaeological digs on the back of it, and also looking at landscapes in a different way. So it's been, it was really valuable. And, Ben and your team with Alice and what have you, it was just really interesting just to, literally from holding a spade up to start with to doing, I have to say, a day's work of backfilling, 20 tons I calculated it was, putting that soil back. But absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate your continued enthusiasm. on it all. I wish you both well. Thank you.
I wish I'd brought hand cream for everybody, actually. That would have been quite welcome. There were some impressive blisters on some hands, weren't there, that day? So thank you very much for people who did all that hard work. Any other questions or comments?
On the knowledge transfer stuff, Don O'Meara, who at HE in Newcastle, has asked. He's also the editor of the Archaeology Alenia, which is the Northeast Archaeology Journal. And we will be putting in a short note on the findings at Horncliffe to that, just so that that is going out to the wider reading public, general reading public anyway. So yeah, a genuine contribution to the understanding of archaeology in the Northeast from everyone. Thank you all.
Thank you. And so I think our speakers deserve a little round of applause there. Well done. If you have any further questions that you think of, I think most of you know how to get hold of us on the project. If you don't know, it's just find our website, unionchainbridge.org, and you can find contact details for us there. Thank you all very much for being interested. There's still plenty to do on the project, so if you haven't worked with us yet and you want to volunteer, again, details on how to do that are on our website. And stay in touch, and let's enjoy heritage together in the future. Thank you very much for coming, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks all.